My objectives for this lesson. Students will create a model of the atmosphere on Google Draw to demonstrate the different jobs and characteristics of each of the layers of the atmosphere and acknowledge the human impact on the atmosphere with 90% accuracy. Why I ask for 90% accuracy on this particular lesson is because I do think it is an easier lesson. It doesn't require a lot of high-level thinking. It's more of, can you follow directions? Because I tell them how to create the graph, they just have to be able to apply it to their particular model. So it should be a little easier for them to specifically understand what goes in each layer, but they do have to kind of find that information from several different sources. For the reading passage, the Google Slides, and there's a video that also helps them with the pictures. So they do have to kind of be able and be willing to find that information in the resources I provided. So my audience is students. My behavior that I'm wanting them to do is to create a model and to acknowledge that we as humans will impact global warming. And the conditions I'm using is going to be Google Draw primarily. And 90% accuracy, as I've previously described, it is an easier activity. I do expect a higher percentage of accuracy because of that. Procedures. So they first will watch an atmosphere BrainPop video. My kids love BrainPop videos. They're quick, they're easy, and they tell the basic information. Kind of really does a nice job of introducing the lesson for us. Then we will work on the slides, and they will build their atmosphere graph by using the slides. They'll label the layers, drag over the pictures, and make captions. And then finally, they'll complete the Google Form conclusion questions, which just kind of ties in all that key information and makes sure that they understood all the parts that they were supposed to of the lesson. Resources. So Google Forms, same reason why I used it in the last unit. It grades itself, provides instantaneous feedback. BrainPop videos, they're animated, they hold student engagement, they're cute, they're fun, they're easy to understand. I really like BrainPop videos. I love that they're so short, but they provide a plethora of information in a short amount of time. Google Slides, very easy to use. I love that I can set it on Google Classroom to just view only, so kids cannot edit it. In the past, when I've had kids being able to edit the directions on a doc or something, then it seems that they delete things and get things messed up. So I like to make it a view only so that they cannot alter or change the directions in any way or claim that they did not have that in their directions. And then Google Draw, again, one of my favorite resources because it provides a great way for them to create models and allows them to drag and drop items, add text boxes, add pictures. It's a fabulous resource. Differentiation for this lesson. They're allowed to work at their own pace, not just through the notes, but also through the graph component. I can easily make reduced multiple choice questions on the Google form as well, very similar to last lesson. I can use, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I can easily make a copy of the form and then just reduce choice questions and add different word banks and such to help my struggling students. Another thing that I didn't add on here that I should have is that there's multiple forms of the information. You're not just going to find it in written form because we have a lot of kids that struggle with reading comprehension, but I also have videos on the directions. So the videos can help them get the information. So they can hear the information, they can see the information, and they can read the information. So it's going to have multiple modes of delivering that instruction to make sure we're reaching all of my diverse learners. Assessment for this lesson is the Google form. Again, great way to easily have them reflect on what they did. You can ask at the very end, I generally ask a reflection question like what went well with creating your graph, what was difficult, what would you add to your graph, and just making sure they're having that learner to self participation, making sure, and sometimes I also ask about my lesson. How can I improve the lesson? What would you like to see happen with this activity? And then that's that learner to instructor participation as well. And then finally, they have this beautiful graph that shows their understanding of the atmosphere, and that is definitely the learner to content information, which is great. Lesson 3, this is my collaborative lesson. This is where kiddos are going to work together in groups. I love labs. I do many labs throughout my year. I do over 55 labs within my school year, and it's great. I love it. This is a great lab because it shows how the greenhouse effect works. Students are going to put one thermometer under a heat lamp by itself, and the other thermometer is going to be under a glass jar. And they're going to notice that the glass jar thermometer is going to increase its temperature much more quickly because that glass jar is acting as a greenhouse. And then we connect that to the greenhouse gases in the environment. I utilize a Google Docs lab sheet for directions and their data tables to collect that information. And then I also attach a Google form to the very bottom of it, and that is what they will use for their conclusion questions. Their conclusion questions, again, I want them to have instantaneous feedback on, which is why I utilize that Google form. Also helps me save some time. I got lots of grading to do with 100 kiddos, so it helps me save some time, and I can spend more time grading their graphs or their actual reflection questions on the Google Doc lab sheet itself. They have to create a graph. We use Google Sheets. We use many graphs throughout the year. Any lab where we can possibly graph our data, we talk about let's graph it, because we want to organize our data, and we want to make sure that the trends and patterns of the data is being shown. So standards for this last lesson is to ask and clarify evidence of the factors that have caused the rise in global temperatures over the past century. Again, this one is honing in on that idea of global warming and human impact. 2 technology standards for this one. Students communicate complex ideas clearly and effectively by creating or using a variety of digital objects, such as visualizations, models, or simulations. In this visualization, they are utilizing a Google Sheets line graph rather than the Google Draw atmosphere graph. They are also going to be partaking in computational thinker because they're going to collect data and they're going to identify the relevant data sets and use digital tools to analyze them. They're going to use Google Sheets to organize and analyze the information. It just baffles me every year that when you show kids data on a table and you can see the numbers are going up, they won't always put together that the thermometer under the jar is significantly warmer. But then you have them graph it on a Google Sheets and they can see the lines and they can physically see that the purple line is above the green line or whatever color the lines are. And they can really then visually see what the lab proved to them, that the thermometer under the jar did in fact get much hotter. My objectives for this last lesson. Students will conduct an investigation to determine the impact greenhouse gases has on global warming and present their data in the form of a line graph using Google Sheets with 80% accuracy. Notice this one I only ask for 80% accuracy because there is a lot more of a higher level thinking element to this one. They have to be able to piece together that the glass jar represents the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and that the heat lamp represents our sun, and it works on a much larger scale than what we did in this smaller lab. My audience is still my students. My behavior that I'm expecting them is to conduct an investigation and to present their data. I'm requiring that the conditions they use is Google Sheets to create those graphs. And then, of course, my degree in which I expect this is 80% accuracy. Procedures. So they watch a quick brain pop to begin the lesson over greenhouse effect. We've already talked about greenhouse effect a little bit before this unit, or I shouldn't say unit, before this lesson. And then the brain pop kind of just reviews that information. Again, it's a great 2-3 minute warm up to kind of get us going and thinking in that right direction. Then they'll put the 2 thermometers under the lamp and see which one. We do it for about 30 minutes. Sometimes I can't quite get 30 minutes out of it. I may have to go down to like 24 to 27 minutes. I do it as long as possible so they can get the most amount of data they possibly can. And then they will create their line graph using their Google Sheets. Resources. I've already discussed several times now how I utilize Form and why I utilize Form. I've also talked about BrainPop videos, that they're animated, they hold student engagement, and they're quick and easy to use. Google Sheets is a new one for this particular lesson, and it's very user-friendly. It does help them visually see the overall trends in data, which is something that is vital to them understanding the scientific phenomenon that they're experiencing. And it definitely helps them organize their data. They need to understand and learn how to create tables and then take those tables and turn them into the correct type of graphs. In the beginning of the year, I tell them, you need to create a bar graph, or you need to create a scatter plot, or you need to create a line graph. And then by the end of the year, I expect them to look at the data and determine which graph would be most appropriate to demonstrate the data for this particular lab. So it does increase in difficulty as the year progresses. Google Docs is great because it allows them to import the graphs straight from Google Sheets. Some kids like to take a picture of their graph when it's done and import it as a photo. Some of them like to hit insert sheets, and you can insert that graph directly into it as well. So different ways to do that as well. And definitely just provides a great place for students to record and hold all their information. Differentiation, working in partners, is that learner-to-learner participation. It's definitely a form of differentiation. Anytime that you're allowed to work with a partner that's helping students ask questions, get help with things, and kind of divvy up that workload and takes a little bit of the stress level off. I like to keep my groups at about pairs, as really 2 or 3 kids. I don't like to get larger than 2 or 3 kids because then you'll get a lot of kids that sit around, and then you're not getting any participation, which is not what you want. The video tutorials, I make video tutorials that are of my screen creating different graphs so that when they create those graphs on Google Sheets, they know what they're doing. Some kids don't need them at all. They are shown one time and then they're good. They remember every time. Some kids use them every single time. So I always make sure that they know those resources are there for them if they forget how to create those graphs on Sheets. Because I make them label each axis, x-axis, y-axis, and title the graph to make sure that their data is being displayed correctly. And then finally, assessment. The Google form will assess them, and also that I can look at their graph, and just by glancing at their graph, I can tell whether or not they did the lab correctly. If their thermometer number 2, the one that was in the jar, is not significantly higher than the one that is not in the jar, then I know something went wrong with the lab, and that's when I check in with that lab group and say, what went wrong? I've even redone an entire lab with a lab group before. If they completely got something wrong and they weren't understanding, I've allowed them the opportunity to just redo it, start from scratch, figure out what went wrong, and reflect on it. To me, that opportunity to redo and revise is more crucial than just getting the bad grade and saying, okay, that was a bad run, we'll go on to the next one, because I have tended to see a pattern that kids will make the same mistakes over and over again if you don't take the time to sit back and correct them. And that's it for my presentation for this unit, so I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next unit. Thank you.